Hey, so this is like a spiritual sequel to my video about asking for advice online and the weird, distorted advice that you sometimes get. I was sort of thinking about some experiences I've had when I've briefly tried to go to therapy, but also just with like a certain ways of thinking about like I guess basically taking people at their word or not and questioning your perceptions or not. So I watched this video, which I'm not gonna name the person who did it because I don't know any of his other work, and maybe he's like actually a great guy. But he is like this therapist, and I guess he does streams where he does therapy esque conversations with different internet personalities. And I was watching him do sort of this therapy esque conversation with a YouTuber that I like, and while I felt that he had the best of intentions, it got to a point where I felt the therapist was kind of brushing off her real experiences and telling her to question her perceptions and like change the way that she thinks about things. And like at a certain point, I felt like this guy obviously wasn't that educated about her life experiences, but at the same time, he was like very quick to apparently assume that negative experiences that she had in life were like totally a result of her own perceptions. And so I got really put off by the video at that point. I'm not sure if I'm even going to finish it. I've been watching it for a couple days because like it's interesting to hear somebody that you're a fan of kind of talk about their life in like a very casual, straightforward, off the cuff way. I mean, a YouTuber, because you're used to seeing them talking about things in a more scripted way, even when they're talking about personal things. Um, but yeah, it got to the point where like I couldn't stand to watch it anymore because I felt like this therapist was like doing this thing where he thought he was getting these big gotchas about her, where he was like revealing like these deep issues that she had. And it was like, no, dude, she's like literally just describing something that happened to her. Like, why don't you consider that it really happened? So I guess it made me think about some of my discomfort with therapy, some like not great experiences I had when I went to therapy a few years ago, and how I actually always kind of suspected that I would have these experiences if I went to therapy, which I'm sure a therapist would say means that I just like, created that experience for myself because it's what I was expecting. But I don't think so. I think sometimes people know that certain types of things are likely to happen and then they do happen, and it's not because you made it happen, it's because you know what the world is like. So I guess for me, one big thing that I've often thought about and that I used to really struggle with is the fact that I have a disability. It affects my daily life and basically my ability to do everything, but I live in a world where a lot of people probably won't realize that I have a disability and like may not believe me or really understand if I tell them about it. Even if they say I believe that you have a disability, they might not really understand or believe what that means. I'm sure I've given this example before, but there's basically this classic Oliver Sacks piece about this woman who has a brain injury and she loses her sense of proprioception, which is where your body is in space. And so after this happened to her, it was really hard for her to move because, we're so used to knowing where our body is that we don't even know. But I guess if you don't know where your body is, it's really hard to move and you move really slowly and awkwardly. So Oliver Sacks brought up the fact that, like, people would get annoyed with her and be impatient with her in public spaces. And it was kind of hard because it wasn't like a simple disability that everybody knows what it is and that she can explain. Um, it's like a funny thing, I think, for me about being autistic or probably similar things like ADHD or like frontal lobe injuries, where you have problems with kind of like the executive functions, um, kind of brain stuff that like things where most people aren't disabled are able to do certain things, but they don't necessarily know that like they don't necessarily see themselves as being able to do certain things, having certain abilities that other people might not have. They just think everyone can do this. So, especially if you don't fit their stereotype of like someone with a mental disability, then it's like they don't really understand that you can't do certain things. I've been intending to make a video for years just kind of about my daily life and the things I struggle to do because It can be a little not hard emotionally, but like logistically difficult to like try to talk about and explain to people. Like, funnily, I think that like there's a lot of people in my life who probably don't really know. Um, but yeah, so like I struggle to basically do everything. So there's long periods of my life where basically all that I do is go to work, or maybe do activities with friends if I've been asked to do them, but like don't necessarily have the energy to even like plan activities myself. And that like when I'm not at work, I'm basically just like sleeping. And that I even periods of time where I even really struggle to just like wake up, get dressed, and go to work. Like, even that's really, really hard. um, I guess the thing is, yeah, I used to find it really stressful and frustrating. Not so much that I wanted people to be like, oh, things are so hard for you, and like give me sympathy or something, but just this constant stress of the idea that like maybe someday I would like not be able to function anymore, and there would be no help or support for me because people wouldn't believe me that I couldn't do anything. But also just this fear that, yeah, just the fear of like being judged, of people being angry with me, thinking I'm lazy, or friends thinking I'm uninterested in them, or I'm ghosting them because I have no energy and I can't do anything. Roommates or people that I've lived with being upset with me because like they feel I'm lazy around the house because I'm just sleeping all the time or whatever. um, yeah, so that stuff is something that used to really, really frustrate and upset me, and I just had this really strong sense of like wishing like so desperately that I could like explain, that I could like make people see it was real, and just really struggling with the fact that I couldn't. So I kind of forgot where I was going with this. I guess it's just that used to be like a really, really big frustration in my life, like just like an agonizing thing to think about, the fact that like things were a certain way for me, but like the majority of people would never understand or believe that. And it's funny, like, I think there was a time when I thought I would never be able to have peace about that unless I could somehow explain to other people how things are. But I don't know, I just somehow just don't really care anymore. Like, maybe it just took time and like getting older, because I'm just like, there's logistical problems that could arise from these misunderstandings, but it doesn't bother me on like an existential level that people don't understand. Not anymore. So anyway, I guess one thing I was thinking about is, because I've had this experience throughout my whole life, and I think a lot of autistic people have had this specific experience where if you can talk and people perceive you as being like highly verbal and like articulate, whatever that means, then it's like, because of that, people even more like get angry at you and think that you're faking. And I think especially when you're a kid, it's like much harder to avoid these situations, and like you're not in power, you're not the authority figure. So like as an autistic kid, you're like constantly in these situations where adults are angry with you, and they accuse you of like faking, not being able to do things, or like being stubborn or being lazy. And it's just really upsetting. And because there's no way to prove to them that you can't do it. Especially when you're a kid, it's not like you have other, access to like diagnosis or information like outside of authority figures and adults probably. So like, you have no like backing to like tell them that like, hey, this is like actually how it really is, like I really have a disability. Like, it's just like everybody sees how things are for you, everybody's with you all the time when you're a kid, and they see that you can't do things, but they just don't believe what they're seeing, and they're angry with you. Sorry, I feel like I keep going off track while I'm talking about this. Sorry. Okay, so I think what I'm going with is saying, because I have this experience, because I grew up with this experience, and because it's the way things still are now, like, for a long time I had this really strong idea: you should never like argue with other people's perceptions, and like other people shouldn't argue with yours. So like, just because I was thinking about how frustrating it is to not be able to do things and have people not believe you and try to make up some other motivation for what you're doing, and just like not believe your version of events. um, then when I was in my early 20s, I was in an abusive relationship, and I think one reason I stayed in it for a long time is because for a really long time I kind of doubted and constantly downplayed like my own perception of events, and I was constantly like, you know, she doesn't mean to do these things, like, you know, it's my fault that these things upset me so much. It's like my fault that I'm so scared. It's like my fault that I'm basically being controlled by her. I'm just like letting this happen. I'm just doing this to myself somehow. Um, yeah, so I think after that happened, I also had a really strong sense of like, I don't know how to explain it, but I think I sort of went off really far in the opposite direction where I felt like if you feel like somebody is being malicious or bad or controlling to you, you're definitely right. Like, your perception is definitely right. And, like, that's not true either. Sorry, I feel like this video is getting really long and I still didn't get to the point of what I was thinking about. I guess what I was thinking about is, like, on the one hand, I think it's really dangerous and damaging if like a therapist is seeing a patient who's in an abusive relationship, for example, and is trying to tell them, oh, you should be more positive, you should think about things more positively, are you sure you're not just projecting that your partner is trying to harm you or whatever. And like, I do think that's kind of like the most dangerous level that this kind of therapy thinking can get to, like this idea of like, basically it's all in your head. Why don't you see everything in a more positive way instead of seeing everything in a negative way? Like, it can kind of put people into the situation where they can just talk themselves out of like actually bad situations, or like just seeing things as they actually are. On the other hand though, like, for me, because I had this relationship when I was younger, like, you know, I'll sometimes have experiences with people, or especially with the person that I'm dating, where like I'll kind of project those abusive dynamics onto our relationship, and I'll be really, you know, I remember recently wanting to talk with the person I'm dating about something, becoming like a huge emotional mess, and having this idea that I wasn't allowed to talk about it. If I brought up this issue, it would be like a huge deal. They'd be really upset with me. They might even end our relationship, and just being like incredibly anxious, like crying about it, and just like being a complete mess. And then once I was able to really think about it rationally, kind of realizing that there was no reason to think that any of that was true, and I talked to them about it and it wasn't a big deal at all. Like, I think because I had that experience when I was younger, even though it was a relatively short relationship, it was like a year, some of the interactions I feel like ingrained such a deep fear in me around having conflict or having conversations with people because they might really blow up at me, that I think like that still sort of affected my some of my interactions with people now, especially people that I'm dating. And my perceptions of those situations like aren't correct. Like, so if I was going to therapy and I was like, you know, blah blah blah, I can't talk to my partner about this, it's not allowed. Like, in that case, it's true, like the therapist would be correct to be like, well, why do you think you can't talk to them? Like, did they actually say this? Like, what exactly actually happened? And kind of questioning whether my perceptions are true. So I just think it's kind of complicated. Another example I was thinking of, this always fascinates me when I see it because I can relate to it so deeply, but I also think it's kind of not healthy. And I see a lot of people in the disability community say things like this on social media. Um, I often see people I often see people complaining that um, somebody else is trying to kill them or physically harm them. And what they specifically mean is that somebody is creating a situation that is really inaccessible for them. So, I don't know, one example is like I really can't be around certain kinds of noise because I'm autistic, like blenders or vacuum cleaners or hair dryers. And like, let's say I was in a living situation where somebody is constantly vacuuming and using a blender in like the kitchen. If I was in that type of living situation, I basically wouldn't be able to use the kitchen, and so I would not really be able to eat. And like, it would really suck if I tried to talk to the person I lived with about this and they just didn't get it, or like sort of didn't believe me that I really couldn't be around those kind of noises. And it's true, I think some people who have sensory issues just like don't get how painful it is, and it's really hard to communicate with them about it, like the fact that you just can't be around certain things. But so let's say I was in that situation, the person was kind of a dick, the person just didn't get it, and I'm like not able to get into the kitchen now. Like, then I go and I'm telling people, my roommate is trying to starve me, my roommate is preventing me from eating, and like they don't care if I starve to death. Like, I see a lot of people in the disability community kind of making the jump to that, I guess, like sort of the jump from like, you know, this person doesn't understand, they're acting in a shitty way that is really harmful to me, to sort of jumping to like, this person's trying to kill me. I know this probably sounds kind of weird if you haven't seen this type of post, or if you don't have the context, but I guess just whenever I see it, it really strikes me because I can relate to it so much. Like, I can totally understand. It's really scary and upsetting to be in a situation where somebody is harming you, but because it's related to this like weird disability related thing that like they don't understand, like, you know, they don't understand that they're harming you, and most people probably wouldn't be on your side because they wouldn't understand. That's really scary. But then like there's sort of this jump to like, this person is trying to kill me, like to something that's much more extreme and like projects much more malice onto the other person than is actually there, even though they are probably a shitty person. um I don't know, I think that's something where there's a real problem, and you shouldn't try to brush away the problem or say that someone's just imagining it. Or probably a lot of therapists, some therapists at least, who aren't disability competent, or specifically about autism in this case, I think a lot of therapists would try to actually think that the disability is like the emotional issue that needs to be addressed. So like, you know, oh, why do you think that you can't be around certain noises or something like that, which is just like, you know, one of the reasons that I think some autistic people just don't want to go to therapy at all, because if the person can't just get that like you can't do certain things and just can't accept that, then like you can't talk to them about anything. But like, even aside from that, like, it is a serious problem if you have this limitation that people in your life won't accommodate or like even admit is there. But on top of that real thing that needs to be validated, there's also this level of like projection and sort of almost paranoia and thinking everyone is against you that comes from a real issue, but also like isn't actually real. um Sorry, I'm extremely hoarse today for some reason. But I don't know, that's just what I was kind of thinking about. I was thinking that in my early 20s, when I went through this whole period of wanting to always take people at their word and always believe people about how they present themselves, because I never wanted people to be in the situation that I have been in, where I say, hey, I can't do this, like this is like this, and people just flat out don't believe me and refuse to believe the words that I'm saying in favor of like what they think people are like, or what they think is like really happening. I guess I found I would never like immediately upon meeting someone be like, oh, that person is presenting themselves in a dishonest way, or that person is deluded about how they really are. But I guess there is a point where after you've known someone for a few years, sometimes you do really have enough knowledge of them that you can be like, hey, this person likes to present themselves as if they're not bothered by anything and they're really rational. But I can actually see that sometimes things do bother them, but they just kind of try to hide it. Or like, you know, this person presents as being really confident, but I can see that they're actually kind of insecure. Or just like the classic type of person who goes around saying, oh, I'm so blunt and honest, I just say how I really feel, don't be hurt by what I'm saying, I'm just being honest. And then like at a certain point, after knowing this type of person for a while, it's like you can really call it, that person is just kind of mean, and like the whole honesty thing is just kind of an excuse. I guess there's something sort of satisfying about knowing people for long enough and being observant enough that you can finally really make the call, hey, the way that they're presenting this just isn't true. But I think it is often premature when people try to make those calls about other people, especially if it has to do with any issue that you don't have a ton of experience with. Um, your frame of reference for like what sounds like it's true and real and what sounds like it's not may just like not be correct. I don't know. I hope this makes sense. It's just something I was thinking about. I actually feel like I was talking about this earlier and I actually had a better setup for it than I do now, but hopefully this was entertaining. I'm gonna try and make the real sort of like disability daily living video that I've been intending to make for years because I do think it's worth talking about. But anyway,